So, as Karen said, I'm Lucy Allen. I'm Director of Research and Healthcare Data at the Trust, and I'm really pleased to have been asked to chair this session today where I get to talk about our lung hubs for innovation lung hubs for cystic fibrosis. And we've been working as a Cystic Fibrosis Trust really closely with LifeArc to help build these innovation hubs, and I'm really excited that we'll get to talk to the panel and our CF community representative later. I'm going to give you a little bit of context into cystic fibrosis and the innovation hubs before we start, and then the panel will introduce themselves, and then we'll start the discussions, and there may be time for some questions afterwards. So as you may well be aware, cystic fibrosis is an inherited life-limiting condition that affects about 11,000 people in the UK. And over the last 10 years, we've seen some really significant changes in the way that people with cystic fibrosis are cared for, and that's really excitingly increased, as a population, their life expectancy, which is fabulous. And one of the biggest changes in the way that people are cared for is the introduction of disease-modifying drugs known as modulators. And about 95% of the population are able to benefit from these modulators, but unfortunately we've still got about 5% of the population that aren't able to benefit from these disease-modifying drugs. Even though we have these really incredible drugs, we know that there are really severe unmet needs for the cystic fibrosis community. And one of these is managing, treating, dealing with infections. And this came out really clearly in a recent James Lind Alliance priority setting partnership activity where treating, managing, detecting infections were some of the top priorities. And recognising and hearing this really clear community unmet need is what brought the Cystic Fibrosis Trust together with LifeArc to build our innovation hubs. So in 2024, we launched our Cystic Fibrosis Lung Health Innovation Hub Network. And through this, we've funded 4 individual hubs with the really clear aim from the start that these individual hubs will work as a network. And there will be shared objectives, shared work streams, shared community engagement, shared industry engagement. And they've all got very distinct scientific programs with overlap where we can, and their directors are actively working together to make sure that these overlaps are maximised and built upon. So we've got 3 of the hub directors with us today. Unfortunately, the 4th wasn't able to join us, but I'll briefly go through the 4 innovation hubs. So at Cambridge, we have FLAIR CF, which is focused on predicting exacerbations using AI and multi-omics. At Imperial, we have Precision CF, which is focused on detecting and characterising polymicrobial infections. And in Manchester, we have Pulse CF, which is looking at identifying triggers of exacerbations and building a clinical trial platform. And then in Liverpool, we have Pulse CF, which is focused on advancing phage therapy and tackling antimicrobial resistance. And as I said, we've been really clear from the start, this isn't a 4 separate grants. These are expected to work together as a network. And one of the things that makes this Innovation Hub network really unique is that from the start, we were clear that we wanted the community voice embedded in everything that we do. So obviously we had the James Lind Alliance priorities that said loud and clear the priorities are helping us manage infections. And then from that, we've also had the individual hubs when they were building their applications, had people from the community helping develop those applications. We've had people from the community sat on application review boards. We also now have community members sat embedded really closely within the ongoing governance structure of this network. And I'm really delighted that Sarah has been able to join us today. Sarah is a member of the cystic fibrosis community. She has been heavily involved in our building ongoing management of the innovation hubs, and she's going to give us a really wonderful perspective on why this network and this infrastructure is really important. So thank you on behalf of the Cystic Fibrosis Trust and LifeArc for everything you've already done. Thank you for being brave. And you did
You'll have me crying already.
Well, on that note, you did say you would try not to make me cry, so I'm going to try and hold you to that one. Okay, so what we're hoping to do today is obviously talk a little bit more about our innovation hubs and what we've learned so far, and hopefully demonstrate how there's an opportunity for other rare conditions to build on what we are learning. We don't have all the answers, but we've got some really good experience, and we are absolutely open to building on collaborations with other other conditions and other charities. So happy to have some discussions afterwards as well. So I will now hand over to the panel to introduce themselves, please. Maybe start at this end with Jo.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo Fothergill. I'm a Professor of Medical Microbiology and Director of the Trial Finder CF Innovation Hub.
Hi, I'm Jane Davies. I'm a clinical academic based at Imperial College in London and working clinically out of the Royal Brompton Hospital, and I co-lead the Precision Innovation Hub.
My name is Alex Horsley. I'm a Professor of Respiratory Medicine in Manchester. I'm a specialist in adult CF, and I'm Director of the Pulse CF Innovation Hub.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kay. I have cystic fibrosis, and I'm part of the Community Advisory Board for the Lung Innovation Hubs. So I get to see all the behind the scenes of what's going on with everything we're going to talk about today.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, so the first question I have for the panel is why should patients help design research and not just be asked for feedback? Jane, are you happy to start?
Yes, I'll certainly give that a go. I think if we look back historically to people who have worked independently in silos with no interaction with the patient community that they're hoping to provide solutions for, that sometimes the sort of best laid plans can end up with something that really isn't a good fit for what the community would be looking for. And getting the patient voice right in at the very beginning to guide the development of the program can actually come up with quite different ideas. So one of the things we're doing in our Innovation Hub is that we're looking for lots of novel ways to try and diagnose infections in people who no longer produce sputum or phlegm because they are healthier on these modulator drugs. Success would look like one or more assays to non-invasively identify these infections. But we think it's really important that we have patients helping us along the way, reporting back on the tolerability of some of the things that we're trying to collect, the frequency, the nature in which we're collecting them, because it would be such a waste of time and effort to come up with something at the end that community said, absolutely no interest in doing that once a week, thank you very much. And so we really want to shape the whole design of what we're doing around the patient and acceptability. And of course, understanding that one size doesn't fit all. What might be acceptable to Sarah might not be acceptable to the parents of a 5-year-old, for example. So we have to work with that as well and really get the voices from across the board in terms of age, disease severity, lots of other issues as well.
Thanks. So Alex, one of your aims within your Innovation Hub is to eventually set up a trial platform, and you've already started running some trials through your hub. I wondered if there's anything that you wanted to add from a trial delivery perspective to build on what Jane was saying.
Yeah, so absolutely. So you need the patient priorities to identify the areas you have to research, but you also need to deliver trials and research that's acceptable. And I suppose that's kind of an extension of what Jane's saying. There's no point coming up with a protocol that actually isn't deliverable. And we did a lot of work in Pulse CF to design our current clinical studies to be ones that patients could deliver on. And you know, we would love to collect everything from everyone every day, but we've got a different protocol that is one that people can live with. And I think the other important point to make is that there isn't a patient voice in CF. There are thousands of different voices, and there's a very, very wide experience of disease across age, across severity, and across background and knowledge. That means you know, patient involvement isn't just asking one person or two people. You really have to go quite wide to do it properly.
Thanks, Alex. Jo, maybe I can come to you because you are more down the basic science end, and it's often, I would imagine, more tricky to make sure you've got that patient voice embedded really early in that early science.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that you mentioned then was sort of feedback as opposed to involvement. And I think feedback is sort of much lower, further down the road. You know, it suggests that the decisions have already been made, the plan's already been made. But involvement really starts much earlier, and that's often missing in that discovery science, that early translation. And so often that's driven by scientific or technical interest. It's often driven by people like me who don't see patients every day, don't treat people. And so really, it's so important that we get that involvement to really re-anchor our scientific interest and ensure that it is embedded really early on and helps to shape it. Because not only is that important to make sure that we're asking the right questions, it also makes it much more efficient and potentially less costly. You know, you can imagine developing this whole beautiful set of preclinical work to then find out that it just isn't acceptable. You know, it takes too long for the treatment. It doesn't have the outcomes that would be acceptable. Well, you would have to go back and reformulate, start again. And that could be really, really costly. So I think, you know, it's really important to embed that early on. But it's not just about communication, about, you know, how we communicate our research or even about how we approach it. I think it's more than that. It's actually about shaping those questions from the off. So using, you know, having that involvement to really shape what are the important questions, and that actually helps improve the quality of our science as well.
Thanks, Jo. Sarah, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think as a patient, we are experts in our disease, and I think it's a real untapped market in research for patients to give their voice. We know everything about our condition, we know all the trials and tribulations, we know what will work as an end product for these things that we're trying to look at, and to not use us in that way for meaningful involvement is kind of a misstep, I feel. Patients know it all. We're like mini doctors. We know everything there is to know, and we need to really use those patients and families of patients with CF and other rare diseases to see where research needs to lead us, not just having one idea and running with it. Because if it doesn't fit with our everyday lives, if we're not going to use it, and it's not, you know, something that can fit in with a practically grueling schedule of medicines, appointments, and normal drudgery of life, it's completely a waste of time. We're going to waste money and valuable time on things that could be drastically improved, you know, for the patient and for the researchers. We all have value on time and effort. And yeah, I think patients are the key to that. I think it's the future of research to tap into those people who know what's needed in the space and how it will be utilised by the end of those products and diagnostics.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so second question is around barriers that prevent promising discoveries from reaching patients. And we know within the cystic fibrosis community how lucky we are to have such amazing research infrastructure, and we feel incredibly grateful for that. I just wondered if you can help explain to the audience how the lung hub model and the network model helps bring some of that together and addresses some of the challenges that you might be facing in terms of getting discoveries through that development process. Alex, are you happy to?
Yeah, so I mean, I think CF, we are very well set up really for that translational delivery. So even before the hub network, there has been a lot of this kind of work that's gone on. So we've got a registry that goes back now almost 30 years, I think. So we know where patients are, we know what the comorbidities are, what the expectations and outcomes are, and that's really helpful for driving patient priorities. We've got very good patient voice really embedded in research anyway. And you know, we've got the James Lind Alliance, and then we've always been very, I think in CF, very strong on bringing that patient voice in. We've got a brilliant network with CTAP, with the Trials Accelerator Program, so linked research centres. So we've got a really very fertile ground just to start with that I think, you know, other rare disease areas could probably learn from. And then the innovation hubs on top of that have been an excellent vehicle for really capitalising on that, building what we already know about the patient priority, so putting that really at the very start of what we're doing, bringing in some excellent science and linking up lots of different groups. And I think, you know, CF is a very interesting area to research. So it's very, you know, it's very easy in some ways really to bring people in, that the patient story is very powerful. And Sarah and I were talking about this, that actually speaking to basic scientists really helps them understand what they're doing in the lab and why they're doing it. And Sarah's done that with people in Liverpool, and we've had our patient advisor do that in Manchester as well. So I think, you know, we're in a very good, we're very fertile ground, and the hub network is a brilliant way of really kind of catalysing that and pushing that forward. And it's explicitly collaborative. So right from the start, LifeArc were very clear, you guys are going to work with each other, whether you like it or not. But actually, again, CF is an area where I think we all get on really well. We know each other very well, and that goes back a long way. There's a lot of collaborative activity. So again, it's really kind of pushing an open door. But I do think it will supercharge things, and I think the way it's been set up and the very sort of outcome-focused approach is something that, it's very exciting to work with.
Thanks. Jo, anything?
Yeah, so I think, when we think about translation, often translation doesn't happen, and not necessarily because of bad science, but often that ecosystem is quite fragmented. And one of the things that the Hub network has really allowed us to do is take that step back and look at the landscape. So when we think about, one of the examples of our work is in phage therapy, there are multiple barriers across that landscape that need to be addressed. And the Hub has allowed us to do that by having people thinking, working with MHRA and UKHSA about access now versus manufacture, so onshore manufacture, as well as some of the sort of key fundamental scientific gaps. And so it's really allowed us to take that step back and address all of these things rather than that sequential addressing. If you think of developing a single product, then normally you would do those things step by step. And that can take a lot of time, and you can risk losing momentum. But it has allowed us to do that. I think the other thing that it's allowed us to do is really think about coordination. And I think you've touched on that in terms of, almost like permission to collaborate rather than compete. And I think that's really important because it saves on duplicated effort, which actually happens quite a lot in research, but also sharing things like big data, models, training, all sorts of different expertise across all sorts of different areas. And I think, really it's a fantastic opportunity to see that. I mean, funding is another big barrier. And I suppose this network has allowed us to think a bit more ambitiously because there's funding for several years. And so perhaps we're addressing things in a much more detailed, much more ambitious way because these projects are going on for longer. And it's creating an ecosystem that I hope we can build on, that will be there ready-made for future opportunities and hopefully secure future funding.
Thanks. Sarah, how has it been from your side interacting with some of the more earliest science? Is that tricky? Do you?
There is some barriers as a patient to. So first of all, it's extremely interesting as a patient to see what's going on in the future of my own disease, and they're incredible, jumps forward that I hopefully will benefit from myself and future generations. But there is something that is a barrier to patients being involved in these kind of models, and that is a language barrier. So we are not scientists, we are not researchers, we don't understand some of the jargon involved with that. And really, if you want to get patient involvement and continued engagement, is to use simplified language. Anything patient-facing needs to be simple to understand. Anyone with a rare disease or any condition is time poor and energy poor. We haven't got the time to unpick this language and understand it. And if we don't right off the bat, it's very easy to just step away from that because we don't have the time. And we need people like me to be involved in this. So if language is something that we need to look at to help people like me to be involved in it and to drive things forward from a very personal perspective, that's definitely something we need to look at. We need to speak to whoever you're engaging with in their own language, and that's been a big barrier and something that actually the Lung Innovation Hub Network has worked with me right from the start and listened to my thoughts on that. And even some of the title of our speech or panel today has been discussed with me, and I didn't understand what it was before. It was a long-worded, jargony explanation. I didn't understand it, and I was like, I don't know what I'm sitting on. I don't know what I'm speaking on a panel level. They listened to me with that, and they always do. Very lucky to be part of a brilliant, CF centre as well with Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital, and I always feel extremely valued in the space and the people that I speak to, and that just needs to continue in like kind of the wider arena, is this simplified language that we can all help ourselves to get on board with things that actually we really should be involved in.
I think what you're saying is so incredibly important because it's actually a life skill that we also need to be teaching our teams. All of the innovation hubs are set out to train a future workforce in cystic fibrosis research and infection research across the board. And that ability to communicate with the people that they're doing the work for is really, really crucial. And so I think it's something that we should value as a skill, as a life skill, and it's something that we should really try and coach the more junior people in our groups and remind ourselves about as well, because I'm not saying that we don't occasionally trip up. So to have the sort of voice of reason there going, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense at all, I think that's something that's really important.
Sarah came to visit my lab actually, and some of the early career researchers in that lab still talk about that, how life-changing it was, and quite how emotional it was as well.
It's very personal, isn't it? This is my life. It's not. I'm not just a statistic or something to analyse, although that's obviously needed in research going forward. It's my life and my future that we're talking about, and I see the work that I'm doing with the involvement hubs and the work that I do with the CF Trust as extremely important. I take it very seriously, and I am creating my own legacy by being involved. I don't want to choke up here, but by being involved in these research projects that mean so much to me and to people that I love and care about also, is powerful. And I'm very humbled to be here and to listen to some of the stuff that is going on. Sorry, that threw me off.
You threw us all off.
It stopped the emotion.
No,
so, yeah, I'm very humbled, and I feel extremely valued in this space, and it's something that hasn't always been accessible to patients to be involved in the research space. So it adds value to my life, and I know future generations to come. So if I'm the one to speak out about it, I'm very comfortable doing so. But it's personal. No, this is my life.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Jo touched on it briefly in her last answer and mentioned that funding is often a barrier to pushing forward research. And we are incredibly grateful to LifeArc for the support they've given us for this £15 million funding programme, which is a cystic fibrosis charity we wouldn't have been able to achieve alone, and this is a 5-year programme. The question is, what is the unique role that charities play in helping build this infrastructure and this ecosystem, and is the amount, the £15 million, enough to actually demonstrate the impact that we're hoping for at the end of this programme? Who would like to go first?
I'll give that a go. I think, well, to answer the last question first, definitely not enough, but a very, very important catalyst. And I think that what we are going to see is this funding and this infrastructure, which is, as we've said, national, and actually in some cases reaches beyond the borders, and we have collaborators outside in other countries as well, is going to allow us to leverage further really valuable funding and bring more funding into the space, both of cystic fibrosis and chronic airway infection more generally, because there are other diseases that can have very similar parallels to this, other forms of bronchiectasis, PCD, etc. So I think that this is a really, really useful catalyst. But what's important for us to remind ourselves, I think, is that we can't sit back and enjoy our programs for the next 5 years and then suddenly think, oh, what we're going to do now. We need to actually be starting to think of this already. And I think it's a really useful to take opportunities to talk about the innovation hubs and the really unique way in which they have been set up, so that we can begin to engage people outside who may have other opportunities for funding also in this context. And now I've spoken for so long, I can't remember what the first question actually was.
It's the unique role that charities
What is the
play
unique
in
role?
this.
Well, it's difficult for me to answer that broadly about charities because for such a long time I have worked in cystic fibrosis, and I think actually we are quite lucky in CF in having a single charity nationally, because it means there's really no dilution of effort. I think that the really big role is that you bring together the patient voice and community together with both scientists and clinicians who are interested in research into something that adds a lot more value than the sum of the individual parts. And the infrastructure which the charity has set up and been pivotally involved with that Alex mentioned at the beginning, including registries and trials networks, means that there's a single sort of organization which is able to oversee what those priorities are, to really collect the views of the community and make sure that the funding opportunities are married to those research priorities, rather than just based on the whim or interest of what a researcher wants to do. I think I would say that that is the really, really big, unique selling point in this particular instance.
Thank you. I think another point is, I think the role, again, I'm talking about the CF Trust, of course, but there's a role of these charities in really sort of instilling passion and long-term commitment to an area. So I can attest to that myself because the CF Trust actually funded my own PhD quite some time ago, and it almost feels like that full circle. I've been dedicated to this area for the last 20 years, and now I'm leading an innovation hub in that area. So I think it has the ability to get people into that area and really instill that commitment. Also, as a charity, there's the ability to have sort of a longer term outlook on your priorities and the priorities of individuals with CF. With funding bodies, you often see trends that go up and down. Certainly we see trendy words that go up and down for a lot of research funders. Whereas I think as an advocate and as a charity, there is that sort of longer term goals that you can commit to that perhaps other funders can't.
Alex, anything to
So I think the CF Trust has been immensely effective in terms of helping drive CF clinical and research agendas. And it's not a charity you see on the high street, but it's been very very strategic and very driven in terms of making sure we have the networks, making sure that clinicians work together, that they fund research with a kind of long-term view, but also engage with companies, pharma companies and sponsors. And I think that within the hub system, one of the roles of the CF Trust is to link up the hubs with other things that are out there, because you have this wider view. Companies come to you, but you also go to companies, and I know that work is already ongoing. In terms of whether 15 million is enough, as with Jane, that's right. It's split lots of ways, so it's not enough. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it will definitely give us that real boost we need at the start. The onus is on us to make the most of that and to create something which is so good that actually more funding will come into it.
Sarah, anything to add?
Just something really simple to end with. 15 million is a start, but it's never going to be enough. We're always going to need more money to push research like this, but it's a start.
Thanks, Sarah.
We're very grateful.
Yeah, very grateful.
Okay, thank you. So that's the end of the set questions for the panel. So there's an opportunity now for the audience to ask any questions that you might have. Please do put your hands up.
Thank you so much. It was a brilliant panel discussion. My name's Katie and I work for the Lilly Foundation, so we're involved in the Rare Mitochondrial Centre. It's so lovely to see a panel of people from different areas of research and to have people with lived experience also on the panel. I lead the patient involvement work for our charity. And sometimes we come across barriers from people who work in the lab or more basic science researchers who say that either their research is too early or the other thing is that they're too busy to involve patients. And I just wondered, obviously that's not something you subscribe to, but how do you start to kind of change hearts and minds in terms of getting people to see the value? Obviously, you already do, but just interested if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a real interest in that interface between scientific research, so sort of microbiology is my background, and that translation piece. So it's never ever, it's always been very, very important to me. But I do recognise that stance. I suppose one thing that has perhaps driven that, sadly, money is sometimes a driver for people, funding. And I suppose the James Lint Alliance and defining what the sort of research priorities are has really helped to embed that in the sort of wider community. I would argue that point with them, that it isn't important, and I certainly think the earlier the better, because I think, as I said before, it can be incredibly costly and really inefficient to then have to go back stages to then rethink whatever it is, whether you're developing a therapeutic or a diagnostic or a tool. So, I think you could have those discussions, but certainly from our end, we've instilled that really early on with our early career researchers, so our trainees that are coming through the hub, and they have found that so transformative. But also some of them have gone on to different careers as well. So beyond research, there are other careers that our trainees may then enter. So I think there are lots and lots of benefits, multi-pronged. It's difficult if somebody just says they're too busy to try and make them see that, right? You perhaps don't want to strong-arm somebody into that, but there are plenty of people out there who certainly see the value really broadly.
Thank you.
I would push back on that as well, because a lot of funders these days, not just the CF Trust, but more generally, have an expectation that there has been some patient involvement work done. They won't be specialists. They won't be able to judge whether this work is truly going to have an output at the end of it. So they expect you to do that. And it's surprising that researchers are not more proactive about that, I think. But maybe I come from above.
Yeah, I think sitting on some of the panels as well, it is very obvious who has involved people from early on with that lived experience and who hasn't, because often the angle is very off.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people are, if they have no experience of that interaction at all, sometimes they're quite nervous about it. And there does need to be a sort of helping them along almost, in terms of, like, Sarah is a human being who happens to live with the disease you're supposedly researching. It enrages me when people think that their science might be too basic to actually be thinking about the patient. It's different if you're doing astrophysics or something. But if you're doing research into a medical condition, then I really think that there should always be some form of contact and influence that goes on there. But sometimes we need to help it along. Yeah. You're lucky you're an evolved human being as well. But, there are people, sometimes people need a bit of a helping hand to sort of be comfortable in that situation.
Yeah. And perhaps that can be embedded in that training, because then it sort of gives an easy platform for those interactions.
Thank you for this very interesting panel. And thank you, Sarah, for sharing your very personal experience. I have a 15-year-old daughter with CF, and I'm also a former trustee of the CF Trust, so I'm not coming at this as an outsider. So I appreciate even more how personal the experience is that you've shared, and you've raised some really, really important points, I think, for all the CF community. And as such, I wonder what it would take to amplify your voice and that of people like yourself who take part in trials, both to encourage more people from the community, of which there are about 11,000, to take part in trials, but also, as you say, to improve and increase the understanding of the researchers and the pharma companies of what it is actually like to live with CF on a day-to-day basis. So it's a question to the panel: what would it take? Time, money, effort, I don't know what technology, to amplify Sarah's voice?
I'm happy to start with some of that. So I think some of the things that I think have worked really, really well are the target product profiles. So there are ones that exist in novel therapeutics, diagnostics, and then we're about to release one relating to phage therapy in CF. And I think they've been really, really important in starting with people with the lived experience in that design of what those those therapeutics or what those diagnostics should look like. And it embeds that voice really, really early on. And you know, I have seen funding calls then that are sort of framed around some of those documents, which then means that innovators look at them, take them into account, and think about that very, very early on. So I think that's one way to have these patient-centered target product profiles, and we've worked with the CF Syndicate and AMR to develop those. Other ways, I don't know. I mean, one of the things we're doing actually is that we are working with a podcast company where children with CF are developing a podcast. Actually, it's an existing podcast. It's called Armchair Adventures, and it's about the innovation hubs. And so they are embedding their voice. They're designing the whole thing. They're doing workshops online. They're working with this company. They're designing the music, the scripts, etc. And that will go out on Spotify and all sorts of different platforms. And so I suppose that's one way of using existing things that already exist and have a very, very good reach to then amplify what we're doing. But, you know, I don't know whether you've got other ways of thinking about amplifying your voice.
I think the most important thing for me is, and the thing that I've seen give the most impact, is someone like me who likes to speak out and finds it quite cathartic telling my own story, is to put people like me at the very start of research, sit me in front of, you know, a big group of researchers who don't really know the lived experience of CF. And you can see, as Jo said, I visited her lab and people still remember me because it's a human story. It's about humanizing these patients within the research from the very beginning. You know, we aren't, as I've said before, data and statistics. We are humans that are going to benefit from whatever projects that you're thinking of developing. And it will give you a driving force on where to go based on the story that the CF person can tell and other people in other areas of disease. So I think it's actually a massive barrier to not be putting people in front of, you know, the people who are going to create things, humanize it, and that's the only way to amplify our voices is to use our voices. And I think the way to get other people involved with that who perhaps aren't already speaking out about CF and how it affects their life is word of mouth. You know, if you know somebody with CF, or you know somebody who would add value to a conversation where previously they haven't been allowed to be in that room, that's the way to go. We need to be involved in serious conversations about the future of our own diseases.
I think I agree with everything that everyone said. I think we do have a challenge with representation. And CF being a genetic disease, it doesn't pick and choose certain types of members of the population. And there are definitely some people that we would know of through our clinics whose voices are not heard sufficiently, maybe people who don't have English as a first language. There's an association with other heritages and not having the gene variants that allow you to respond to modulators, for example, so they may be enriched in that group who have this very big unmet need. And I think that this is a piece of work that we need to continue to have front of mind, and we need to continue to work on to make sure that money is not a barrier, that somebody is not failing to be involved because they can't afford to come travel somewhere or take time off work or get some childcare. All of those things, I think it's really important that we continue to face that challenge and try and improve it. Even if we have lots and lots of people who are giving their voices, does it represent the community that we're trying to work towards?
And I think if you're talking about engaging with sponsors, we have a good understanding of these challenges, but the sponsors really don't. The sponsors, you know, often pharma companies, they're several steps removed from you know, Sarah's reality, as it were. And I think if you can show companies that working with patients will deliver a more effective, easily deliverable, quicker to recruit trial, then that's really important. And the CF Trust, again, to blow their trumpet, have got very good patient engagement that can work at an early stage with companies so that the studies are well designed and address things like, compensation for time off, these kind of things. One of the things that really irritates me is patient information sheets and how they are typically 30 pages of dense text that nobody really, I'm not sure I'd find the time to read that. So I really don't think people pay enough attention to that, and I think making the materials as easy to understand, maybe looking at other ways of communicating, maybe using video rather than just dense text all the time. I think examples of how that works is the kind of thing that will start to sort of push change forward.
Thank you. So I'm conscious of time before we get dragged off the stage. I'm sorry we haven't got time for any more questions. Sorry. Obviously happy to chat later. So just one last reflection from each of the panel members, I guess, on maybe a lesson learned or something that's useful for other rare conditions to be aware of or to consider from what we've learned from the Innovation Hub so far. Jo?
So I think lessons learned, So I think that taking a step back and looking at the entire landscape and understanding the barriers and then setting out to address each of those is something that could easily go far beyond CF. And so I think that is something that we could translate out to other similar hubs and beyond.
I think what I would say is that the research funding environment rewards competitive approaches to research working, and I don't think that's the best way to make big progress. So these sort of structures which actually not only support collaboration but actually mandate it, I think are worth a huge amount in terms of our ability to make big change at a faster pace.
I suppose a lesson for other disease areas maybe would be that you need to have good data, and you need to be able to build a patient voice in at a very early stage and have a kind of long-term strategic view.
I suppose I kind of echo everybody else in everything that they've said, but putting the patient at the centre of everything is key, and to really listen to what we need and what we expect from the end of it. And again, we've spoken about it before, but the time and the energy that it takes somebody like me to even be here today, travel is difficult. I've got a broken foot on top of cystic fibrosis. So we really need to think about simple things that a lot of people don't, to enable patient voice to be in the right spaces.
Thank you. So thank you for your fabulous questions. Thank you very much to my fabulous panel, and thank you, Sarah, for sharing your experience and being part of this really exciting initiative. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.